Good evening, friends. A warm welcome to all of you. Let me begin by thanking each one of you for making time to be a part of the event. I would like to thank the panelists, Shri Udit Raj, Ms. Saba Naqvi, Mr. Girish Nikam, Hartosh Singh Bal, Mr. Sanjay, Macwan, and Kishalay for agreeing to join us for the conversation today. I'm sorry to say that Amitabh Bihar, who leads the team at the National Foundation for India, could not be here today. He's unwell. He was really looking forward to being here and has asked me to convey his apologies for not being able to join us for the event. To share a very brief overview of the foundation, we are an autonomous, professionally managed trust that works on the disadvantaged communities to help them improve their own lives. NFI was set up in 1992 by a group of eminent citizens led by Bharat Ratna Shri C. Subramaniam, Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, late Dr. Kamla Chaudhary, and then followed by an equally eminent group of personalities like Dr. Manmohan Singh, Shri Ratan Tata, Ms. Malika Sarabhai, and others, who recognized the importance of a vibrant voluntary sector in creating a more just and equitable society. Now, what we do at NFI provides technical, financial, and capacity building support to NGOs at local, regional, and national level. NFI works on 7 broad thematic areas. These are community health, elementary education, livelihood security, local governance, peace and justice, citizens and society, and development communication. At NFI, we strongly believe that it is not only critical to support constructive work, but we attach a lot of importance to adequately communicate about this to a wider audience. Development communication is vital for this strategy and therefore a core element of NFI. Through our various schemes and programs, we try to bring development concerns more prominently into the public agenda and the domain of social consciousness. We are continuously engaging media to sensitize them towards development reportage. We are ongoingly trying to work with different forms of media, including the print, electronic, social, and digital media. One of the strategies for our development communication program is to organize spaces such as today for face-to-face communication and exchange of ideas on important social issues that play out on the ground. We believe that if we have serious conversations in forums such as this, then we can have real issues which we can activate on the ground. With this, let me thank you all once again for taking the time out for this conversation today, and feel that your participation and input would help build a common understanding on a critical issue. I'd like to now request our panelists to join us for the conversation on labor exploitation and slavery in India, role of media, government, and civil society. Ms. Saba Naqvi, she's a senior journalist and writer. Shri Udit Raj, Member of Parliament. Mr. Hartosh Singh Bal, he is the political editor with the Caravan magazine. Mr. Girish Nikam is from the Rajya Sabha TV. We also have Mr. Sanjay Macwan, who is from the International Justice Mission, and Kishalay Bhattacharjee, he's a senior journalist and author and would moderate the conversation today evening.
Thanks so much, and a very good evening. You know, in 2012, the summer of 2012 was the first time I had gone to Sundarban. And that was the time actually I learned a little bit about why the Sundarban tiger is so special. And while I was looking for tigers in Sundarban, we came across this village called Sundar Khali. Now, Sundar Khali is a very significant village in context of what we are discussing today. Because in that village, we stumbled upon the story, as we call it in our journalistic language, where every single household, and when I'm saying every single household of that village in Sundar Khali, in Sundarban, had a girl child missing. And they were missing from a period of 3 years to 5 years to 12 years. Now, the reason for that, it's not a random case of one village where girls go missing. There must have been several villages in that area. I did not have the time really to go to all the villages. What had happened was that that was the area that had suffered a cyclone a couple of years back, the cyclone Aila, which affected Sundarban and then Bangladesh. Now, what happens is whenever there is a disaster, whenever there is a disaster like a cyclone or a flood or an earthquake, immediately that impacts those areas and you have a huge surge and spike in trafficking. Now, what does trafficking have to do with natural disaster? Now, trafficking and natural disasters have a very, very close relationship. Because when a area is hit by a natural disaster, you go into debt, you don't have enough food for the children, and that is where the middlemen or the traffickers come hunting. That's the best hunting ground for traffickers. Right now, as we are speaking, 6 million people across 6 states in the country are affected by flood. And those are the areas where the traffickers are going to go. They're going to go and basically convince the parents that you are not being able to feed 4 of your children, why don't you give 1 of them, they can work as domestic help somewhere. And that is how that many children, or women and children, get trafficked. Interestingly, last evening the the NCRB new data was released for 2015, which again shows that 50% of the trafficked people are actually children, which is a bit of a shame. And the trafficking has gone up. I mean, gone up to quite a lot of percentage, significant percentage. But out here, we are trying to also understand, whether when we are talking about trafficking is something that we are now familiar with, at least as a word, and we've been reading, even if not a regular sustained coverage, but we do get, mention of trafficking here and there in the media. But we still haven't been using the word slavery. Now, when a child or a girl or someone is trafficked, put into sex work or put into domestic use, as I can tell you, there are 2,500 illegal domestic help agencies operating out of in Delhi and NCR, and many of us employ our domestic help from those agencies. And those are actually trafficked girls who are, in a way, bonded labor as well. And that is something that we will ask Sanjay, who is the subject expert in this, to explain to us. But I really want Sanjay to lay the context for today's discussion of why we are calling this a slavery, because slavery is something that we still don't use in India, though I know that the US State Department says that the largest number of slaves in the world are in India and Nepal. Now, if you can start by really explaining to us the context of today's discussion.
Thank you. As Kishalay has introduced with a powerful, powerful story, this was not my starting point, but his story reminds me of my own story. Back in the village in a small part of Gujarat, as a child, born in a poor, low-caste family, trying to understand the meaning and purpose of life. Every morning, people would come into our mohalla, as we call them, and then would hire us to work in their farms and their big kilns and in their factories and tobacco plantations. And it never occurred to me that there is anything wrong with it. I started working when I was 7 years old and worked till 22 years old. Every morning I'll go to school. Half day I will be in the school, then half day I will go and work in the farm. Evening I will go to somebody's house and filter their tobacco, which we gathered from the farm. And the abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, social abuse, were part and parcel of our lifestyle. There was no counter perspective to life. And when, after a number of years, when I understood this issue, now, because I have a counter perspective, I'm able to see my life of 22 years and say, there was something wrong going on there. So perhaps you're right. It starts with the perspective of what is this issue. Is it a labor issue, simple labor issue, or is it a real slavery? And I would like to just highlight a couple of points here. First is, what is slavery? how do we understand slavery globally? What are the terms used? Ever since 1926 Slavery Convention, and then 1954, and then our own Constitution, Struggle 1949. For 3 years, Constitution experts were struggling to use the word slavery or not to use. And finally, Article 23 of our Constitution did not mention the word slavery. 1976, we came out with the Bonded Labor Act, again, not to use the word slavery. Very recently, in 2013, IPC amendment of 370 has started using the word slavery, and practice is similar to slavery. And we have started realizing that this issue is much bigger than simple trafficking. And I think as we come across many cases of IPC 370 in the days to come, more and more conversation on slavery will start. Tonight is a good beginning on it. Going back to slavery, I figured out about 6 different elements which were historically used to define slavery. Number 1, people were bought, exchanged, and sold. Number 2, owned by the other people. Other people used people as their property. Number 3, abuse of power by the owner. 12 Years a Slave, if you see the movie, enough of it. Use of force, coercion, and deceit was also there. Physical confinement and detention also was there. No remuneration. There was no payment made to those slaves. These are the 6 elements. Now let's come to the labor or the bonded labor issue in our own country. And we do that work for nearly 15 years in our country now. All over the country we have rescues going on. As I speak, my team in Mumbai is right now with the police rescuing 2 girls from slavery. The Bonded Labor Act, 1976, IPC 370, and many other, ITPA Act, all of it combined together, this is how the elements of trafficking, bonded labor, and I would like to call it slavery are identified. People are bought, exchanged, and sold through creation of debt, or deceived and sold into sex, owned by some other people. Their freedom of movement is controlled. Use of force, coercion, and deceit. And I can give you enough example of it. 249 rescues I have conducted so far. Every single rescue, every single girl tells us, 2 years I have never seen the sun. We have seen people dying in the brothels. We have seen people suffering in the brick kilns. Recently we had a case where a pregnant woman, 4-month pregnant woman, was not given any medicine by the brick kiln owners, and she ultimately died. So there is abuse of power right there. There is a physical confinement. It's just there. Because we are not aware of it, we deal with it every day. My team is waiting in front of the brothel for last 3 hours as I speak to you. Deputy Commissioner of Police is with them, and the brothel is locked. Physical confinement is very much part of this reality. And then negligible remuneration. There is no money. Orissa High Court gave an order on one particular case where they said 18 hours of work, 30 rupees as payment. And freedom of movement is controlled. So all this combined together, I think we must identify this issue appropriately. Last year I trained about 12,000 police officers in Mumbai city alone. And you talk to them, sir, this is a seminar on human trafficking. Half of them will tell you, are you going to talk about traffic issue? Half of them will talk like that. Because the word trafficking in essence communicates what? Unless you go to a school where social sciences are taught, right? Or unless you study the subject, come in seminar like this. The word slavery hits our mind hard. Because as I said in my own childhood, first your mind is enchained to the series of historical, traditional means. And somehow I would like to say that I considered myself as born into a family where slavery is our lifestyle. And there is no counter question asked to it. And therefore, I would like to begin by saying that I think India has done an amazing job, though we took 72 years to realize that. Ever since 1949 and the constitutional debate about, no, slavery. And still we're afraid, public debate, oh my God, no, we are not talking about slavery. Because we have all kinds of connotations going around it. But I would like to submit that people are really enslaved. I see them every day. And let me tell you, as per Siddharth Kara, who is a Harvard expert, researched about 10 years on the subject, including India. He wrote 2 books, one on sex trafficking, another on bonded labor. He says 11 million people are in slavery in India. Recently, I'm sorry, go ahead.
But Sanjay, besides the semantics of the word slavery, hitting us hard than the word trafficking, the fact is that, a very, very lucrative trade flourishes, which is cross-border, where it is not going to end anytime soon. I mean, if what we call India's northeast, now in that area and beyond that, from then Nepal and Burma and Bangladesh, from that area, if you come to what we call mainland India, actually constitutes about 10% of the world's underworld trade, because you have narcotics, you have wildlife trade, you have gun running, and you have human trafficking. And if whoever has come up with this estimate, but 10% or whatever percentage, it would be a significant percentage of the global underworld trade. And till date, not a single kingpin in all these trade has ever been even identified. Forget about being arrested. Absolutely. We do get a lot of conduits who get arrested. So, since we are talking about the role of media and the government and we have someone from the government. Welcome, Mr. Udit Raj, who's joined us just now. He's from the BJP. He's a member of the parliament from the BJP. Thank you so much, Mr. Raj, for joining us. We just started understanding why we should be using the word slavery rather than just trafficking, because what Sanjay was saying, that the word slavery perhaps hits us harder than the word trafficking. And India and Nepal has the world's largest number of slaves, actually. Now, if you say we have the largest number of slaves, it doesn't make us look very good. If we say that, we've got 8,000 women and children who have been trafficked out of West Bengal, it sounds like, okay, I mean, they've been trafficked, we don't know what. So he was talking of the semantics, but what I was saying that besides the semantics, the problem every year is increasing. And are we aware of that problem in a day-to-day manner? I want to start with Saba. Saba, is this not a good enough debate or discussion for prime time or for opinion pages? Not just television, even for newspapers or for magazine cover page, a cover story. Why don't we have slavery and trafficking except for very occasional references to that?
Just one point is that there was a phase, now I'm an independent journalist, when I was handling the Bureau and Outlook. We actually did a cover story, which I didn't do it, but I got reporters to do it, called The New Slaves, I think. It focused on domestic work. I don't know, you must have seen that, right? So it focused on domestics being treated in a certain way. And if we have the time, I'll just tell you, I'm not an expert at all. In fact, I would like to seek a clarification that when you use the word slavery, are you talking about physically? Is that only applicable when people are physically not allowed to leave a particular house? Because if we exclude that, then the way domestics are treated in India, they can leave, but they are treated in such a horrifying way. And here I'll elaborate on something that has happened in my life, which has made me take positions on this theme, is when the first time I felt the need for a full-time help in my home was when my daughter was born, 17 years ago. So I turned to a friend of mine who lived nearby, and she has been active in various political organizations, and she sent a young woman called Bundi to my house who had come from Jharkhand. Bundi could speak in the dialect, and within 2 days, and my child was about to be born, and I needed help at that time. I was managing everything. Bundi came, and then she said that her niece is also coming, Anita. So I didn't have the finances to have 2 people. So I kept her, and I put Anita in the home of a friend who you would be surprised to know. I don't want to give his name up here, but he's a very famous musician right now, part of a very famous band. It was a joint family. I put her in that home, and Bundi is still with me. But she's still with me. She's like a mother to my child. I can work, I can be free. But it is that very early encounter with keeping someone as help which made me very alive to the attitudes, the treatment. I find people who are activists in NGOs, and I take objection to this, who will still not have the same standards for those who work and live and raise their children. So there are these it's a shocking thing, and this is one of the ways that I judge people. My friendships are broken over this. I discovered after 5 or 6 months that this young girl called Anita, who was an Adivasi girl from Jharkhand, was not being given her wages in this family because they said that she is stupid, boykoof hai, she can't do anything. She was just being given food. Anyway, it led to the breakup of a friendship. It led to me and my original friend going and snapping friendship with these ties. Since Anita actually started to live in my house. She lived with me for many years. She's now married. They've picked up the ways of the big city. She's moved back to the village. Bundi is, of course, she runs the house. She ignores me. She sometimes. And these are people who came there. Now, if it had not been me, but another person who would have, these were people who were scared when they arrived in the big city. They were young women who were frightened, who could barely manage Hindi, who spoke in their dialect. And if a middle class family whose son is singing lyrics about enlightenment and revolution can treat a maid servant in this manner and say that she's not worthy of wages, we are giving her food. You know? So, I mean, I'm just telling you this because this happened very early in this journey. I now live in a building where I have constant battles with people in my other society because they want those who are working should not take the lift. Those who are employed should use the stairs. The drivers should stand up when the Saab and Mem Saab. I mean, you know, the social attitude of our middle class are disgraceful. I think some of us, I think your story, I'm sure I'd like to know more, is remarkable. But I think if we just start looking at what we do, what we allow our sisters, husbands, wives, how they talk about and treat those who come and work for us, instead of with some dignity. I think the first thing has to be, let's decolonize our own minds. Look at how our loving mothers, not mine is very fair, but I've seen so many bright people, you go and you see the way their mothers talk about, these people are like that, these people can't be trusted. So the disease is all of us who come and show so much concern, the sickness lies in the middle class also. That's broadly what I'll say. So about the media now, broadly, I mean, I can say that some stories are done about this, but if any, the model of the media has become such that people, if anything requires long investigation, long travel, it's not invested in. You know, that's true. That's the truth. If you can do a quick thing, if somebody can hand you a briefing about horrific slave labor somewhere, a written briefing to a journalist, it'll get carried. Possibly if there's no competing story about Baluchistan, Pakistan and all that night. I mean, or something on those lines. Because the media has always been, there is a very simple thing which I've repeatedly said, there is a great narrative of identity debates which has been fed to us since our birth as a nation. Always. We've made to fight over identities all the time because the economic issues and the conditions of many of India's people prefer not to look at that. It's something it's a trap we all fall into subconsciously. And I don't know about the technicalities of the word slavery, but we have quite easily used it in the magazine once. But there are constraints also about, that the media has, and the media is trapped in all these sensational debates. We all know that. I mean, there's no point saying otherwise. I think I've taken enough of your time, and that's it.
But it's quite, interesting because at least in this topic, I mean, for gun running and for wildlife trafficking, narcotics, everybody in this room may not have a story. But for slavery or bonded labor or trafficking, every single person in this room will have a story. I mean, of their neighbors, of something that they've heard, of that they've read. It is a commonplace, everyday occurrence around us. So it is not something that, you need to really invest, go And today the resource, the media is resource crunched. We do not have money. The media houses don't have enough resource to really undertake a long investigation of this nature. But there was a time when we were pretty flushed with fund. I traveled 12 states all the time, and we did these kind of stories. But Hartosh, I want to ask you, what is the newsroom dynamics? I mean, why is it forever that certain stories always get more priority than the others?
There are, I think, 2-3 issues and 2-3 levels at which the media gets into problems reporting such stories. One is largely systemic, and I think all of us are aware that incidents, cruelties, deaths, sexual exploitation, anything that is of immediate news value will get priority. For example, I've been a district correspondent in Punjab. There's a whole tradition of Syri, bonded labor, migrant labor. I went and report a story, 90 laborers for months kept on a farm, women sexually exploited, no wages paid, men beaten. I'll get the front page the next day. The numbers are such, the stories are so horrific. If I want to report on the situation of bonded labor or the institution of Syri in Punjab, there will be far less interest. This is not just the media, there will be far less interest in the reading public itself. It's also a problem, you can see this is not just restricted to this issue. Starvation deaths, you will get front page. You want to report malnutrition, suddenly. This is a problem with the very structure or nature of media, which we have to realize we cannot get past this, which is where civil society has to step in. Media will always make this distinction. We cannot wish it away. There are ways of trying to focus. There are places where you can focus on, but in general, this will always be true. The second is the issue that Saba raised, which is the issue of what is the social conditioning of the people around us. Some stories like malnutrition or the condition of domestic help are not stories because we seem to accept their fate. And what happens? Again, in Punjab, I'll give you my experience when I was a reporter in the districts. Every third day, the vernacular papers in Punjabi and Hindi would be carrying stories of what has happened to Punjabi immigrants in Canada, in the UK. You're not allowed to wear pagdis, you are running to this problem, this discrimination. You suddenly turn the gaze around in Punjab, what is happening to Bihari migrants and the conditions they are living in. Nobody's interested in reporting the story. The reader is not interested. It is almost taken for granted that Bihari migrants have to be treated in a certain way, and that condition is no interest to us. So when our social conditioning is such, there is a little that media can do to break through that barrier. Then you finally come to, of course, the structure of the media, corporate media, English media with its focus on urban issues, a middle-class audience that is not interested in many of these stories. That's the third layer. But I think there are 2-3 ways in which we run into these problems. And is there a way of short-circuiting all this? No, it is just that conscientious reporters, places will have to keep at stories. And the last thing in this, whether we like it or not, good intentions are never enough. The only stories that will have an impact are stories that are well written, work as narratives that make the reader read. Often we make the mistake that just because this issue is important and I write about it, the reader must read it. Unfortunately, that is not enough. The story has to be written in a way that it goes out and makes sure that the reader reads it, otherwise there is no point. Too often journalists think good intentions are enough for them to report on an issue.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important point. In fact, yesterday, New York Times, Ellen Berry had this article on dead eyes, on the pellet injury in Kashmir, and that was a story that you kind of read in the first 3 paragraphs. It kind of makes you feel a little uncomfortable, but it's a very, very important story. I mean, it's a pellet injury story, which everyone has done, but nobody really wrote about the physics of what a pellet does and when it goes inside your eyes. It goes round and round, destroys every part of your eye, and everything gets matted. So it becomes very difficult for you to get back the way she's written. So what Hartosh is saying, it's important that, and for a lot of journalists and young journalists out here who are going to go back, and they are, and I'm going to come to Girish relating to that, the question. But before that, before I go to him, it's extremely important that it's not just the strength of the story, but the story needs to be well written, presented, argued, there has to be a narrative. Otherwise, that story is not going to make. Whether it's a first page story or a middle page story, it'll never make there unless. And increasingly, one can see that the quality of writing or the quality of storytelling is deteriorating for whatever reason. I don't know that. But Girish, since we are addressing an audience like this, one of the problems of this social, how we construct these ideas, around these things, is also because the manner in which we have reported over the years. So for 25 years, if we have reported Dalit issues in a particular way, we've also stereotyped. And now there's an opportunity because, we have young people in every district of this country. They are armed with a, cell phone and, a computer. They know how to, digital and, connectivity has really helped us being able to connect to the ground much more than we did, 15 years ago, or even 10 years ago. Is there an opportunity now for newsrooms to actually leverage the strength that we have on the ground and have more ground reports? So, sending people from there is not worthwhile. Also, I think it's not very fair because, you already have people on the ground. Why do, paratrooping journalism, someone going from Delhi and trying to do a trafficking story in Chhattisgarh, comes back once and then that's over. They don't do a sustained thing. Out here, you get sustained news coverage from the ground and slowly that stereotype also gets challenged. Is that a possibility?
Well, see, we are living in a completely different era. When I started my journalism almost 35 years back, a few people used to be there in district. I also started from a district in Karnataka, in Mysore. So we were about half a dozen journalists in a district, and we were filing stories we were all print journalists. There was no television, and there were a way of doing our journalism in those days. And stories would get there were not so many editions which we have today. In most of the newspapers have so many editions, and they all become micro mini editions. And if you read any newspaper, you go to say Aligarh or Meerut or things like that, you don't get to know what is happening in Delhi or even in Noida, which is not too far from where Meerut and Aligarh is. So there is a problem there in the sense that the way journalism is done, the way it is happening, there is a problem. And also, as far as television is concerned, their priorities are completely different. Story has to be sensational. For any story to make it, on the screen, it has to be sensational. And that is what most of the channels are doing. Anyway, these are problems which we are facing because things are changing. As far as doing journalism about these issues are concerned, whether it's labor exploitation or slavery, I would like to talk a little bit of slavery. I'll come to it. Labor exploitation is something which all of us as journalists have at some point of time or the other covered and written about all the time. But now there is just no space in the media for labor at all. Please understand that. There is no. When was the last time you people read a story about a strike happening in some major industry? When was the last time you read it in the newspapers or on television? Hardly we ever see it at all. Labor is no more an issue as far as media is concerned. It's a very big problem. I was in Jaipur about a couple of months back. I met two youngsters who had been sacked from Maruti. And they were telling us, sir, we have been trying to get our story into the media for so long, nobody is willing to listen to us. Nobody is willing to write about us. Nobody is willing to show what is happening there. So this is the state of the media as far as labor exploitation is concerned. As far as slavery is concerned, I just, Kishalay, I'll take 2 minutes because, when I was told about this thing which I had to attend, I was because as a journalist for last more than 3 decades, I have never used the word slavery in whatever I've written, I think. Slavery was something which never existed in the Indian journalistic vocabulary. It is for the first time I was quite intrigued by the use of this word. So I just did a little bit of research. Can't call it research really. Anyway, I just wanted to know what is this slavery. There apparently a global slavery index of 2016. A report has come of Global Slavery Index 2016, in which the term slavery, the term modern slavery, refers to situations where one person has taken away another person's freedom to control their body, their freedom to choose, to refuse certain work, or to stop working so that they can be exploited. Freedom is taken away by threats, violence, coercion, abuse of power, and deception. This is what slavery is supposed to be, according to the Global Slavery Index. Now, see, the problem with these kind of definitions is that in India, we can't just take these definitions, just like that and try to apply it here. For instance, I was thinking, while I was driving here, I was thinking to refuse certain work or to stop working. Now tell me, how many of us have this advantage to refuse work? All of us sitting here on the panel have been journalists. I don't think many a times we have been able to refuse work which have been given to us as journalists. As journalists. One of the biggest, since this is also about media, let me tell you, when we talk of slavery, many of the journalists have become slaves in their organizations. Okay? So we have all gone through the phases of slavery in the media. Most people are going through it right now also. Okay? And if you talk of this freedom to refuse work or to stop working, we can never do. If we do, we end up, Saba has ended up as a freelance journalist. It is. I know you're doing well. I told you will do well. I told her that when she was quitting that, you will do much better. Don't worry. Don't continue to be a slave for too long. This is what exactly I told her. And so, first media has to get itself out of this slavish mentality which we have got into. Okay? For us to actually fight slavery or bring slavery in the modern definition which it is being talked about, which I have my serious reservations about this modern definition, because in a place like India, we can't be so rigid about definitions. Anyway, I think as far as raising these issues are concerned, we can only hope that better sense will prevail upon the media, and more importantly, the owners of the media. Thank you.
Mr. Udit Raj, the government, obviously, in a country like India, is the agency that is going to implement, frame laws, bring about change. In a country of 1.2 billion, you can't expect, NGOs or the media really to drive change. That change has to happen. The government has to be held accountable. For example, when we say media, we very often forget that actually media is the state-run media, which we have completely forgotten. So media is not. We were part of small little private media. Doordarshan, for example, is the state-run media, which does nothing of driving change, of the role of the media that they're supposed to play, which in other countries you have. You have a TRT in Turkey, you have a BBC, which is not exactly state-run, but still state-run in that sense. They play the major role. In India, that role has completely been, almost given up by the state-run media and given to small media organizations which don't have the resource really. But the one thing that I wanted to ask is that, two questions to you, is the government really seized of the magnitude and the gravity of the problem? Because in the recently drafted Anti-Trafficking Act, again, prosecution seems to be the approach. Whereas in trafficking, prosecution cannot be the approach, because these mothers who gave away their daughters in Sundarban, before you came, I was telling a story of how every household of a cyclone-affected area gave away their daughters, was because they couldn't feed the daughters. They were not selling the daughters or giving the daughters off to the middleman, out of greed of getting money from them, because they couldn't feed them. So we have socio-economic factors out there which drive trafficking. Now, those are not there as part of the Draft Act. The Draft Act is about prosecution, of how rescue and rehabilitation should happen. But rescue and rehabilitation is after the trafficking has already happened. The area, we already have very, rich hubs of trafficking across the country out here. It's the world's, biggest hub for trafficking. So is the government seized of that gravity of that problem?
Thank you so much. Laws are in the place. I think we have more laws than any other country. But the question is of implementation. Whatever the best laws, even if we have, If it is not implemented, then what is the use? So the one part, see, the government, the political part is one thing, then judicial part, then executive part. I, as a member of parliament, is responsible as a legislature. We are the legislatures. Then comes to executive role and judiciary role. Now the judiciary is completely independent of, you can say that, will of the people. In other words, I would say that 5 people are running the judiciary who are accountable to none. I'll say that collegium system is in place now. And as per constitution position, in appointing the judges, the role of executive should be primary, but now no longer executive plays the role in appointing the judges. This is the only country where the judges appoint judges. And last year we amended the constitution, that is National Judicial Appointment Commission, that has been struck down by Supreme Court. The reasons for that, political parties will never come on consensus, even if any issue is of utmost important for the nation, for citizen, and where there should be consensus, but it will not because of their own sectional and personal interest.
Is it political parties or even within the political party also is there consensus? Say,
Yes,
for example,
yes,
within BJP
political
is there
party.
consensus?
No, political parties. What has happened in case of Ramaswamy, when impeachment was initiated, despite the fact it was a proven case, but political, the issue became of north and south. This political party versus that political party, and that discouraged now to bring any impeachment motion against any judge. So what happened? Now there is a disappointment, discouragement. A judge in Ahmedabad High Court says that because of reservation and because of corruption, the country is being destroyed. I raised this issue, when I raised this issue in the parliament, I said that say about 30 crores as siege and hostage, if you include OBC, because they also fall in the bracket of reservation, are they destroying the nation? So when I raised it, I couldn't find support in the parliament. Even in parliament, the parliament members are afraid of.
Mr. Raj, I'll just interrupt you here.
Let me tell you. So what happened that as far as our role, legislature role is concerned, you can catch hold of them. What about the judiciary? And what about the executive? Right from registering the case, then filing the charge sheet, then prosecution and judicial role. It's a long process. The role of law has hardly been established in our country, though in the constitution there is a role of law. What happened that the conviction rate is very slow, is very low. In case of